This is the Memory Palace. I'm Nate DiMeo. Sometime in late spring, the locust and its egg, visible through its translucent shell, its antennae folded over its face and threaded through its jaws, begins to contract and expand its body, pushing and biting at the thin yellow membrane, tear away at its walls with the barbs in its long hind legs until it is free of the pod. It continues to writhe, push with its legs, working its way upward through a layer of mucus deposited by its mother, excreted from the end of her abdomen as with the other eggs there in a mass beneath the earth. Some hatching now around it, as the locust pushes up and up in the dark, until it breaks through the surface of the earth and out into the sun. A pathetic little thing, an inch and a half lying there in the dirt, pale, nearly colorless, for half an hour or so, as it dries in the air and turns a brownish-grayish green, and then stretches out its wings, two sets, one in the back, wide and strong, that will provide most of the lift, another pair up front that will help it steer, and it beats those wings 20 times per second, generating a rippling buzz and sending it upward to join the others. The swarm, one insect of hundreds of billions, a trillion, several trillion. How can we know now? How could someone think to count back then over all that noise? With a cloud of them. No, a storm of them, a storm of insects blotting out your view. No, blotting out the sky itself. 110 miles of sky. And that's just measuring north to south. Look to the east and look to the west and you can't see how far they go. You can't. The limits of human vision will stop you from seeing it. The curve of the earth will stop you from seeing it. The limits of the imagination almost stop us from picturing it now. An airborne infestation, an apocalypse of Rocky Mountain locusts, stretching 1,800 miles west to east across America, more than half the way across America in 1875. Now today we can look back and use estimates from 19th century meteorologists. We can cross-reference diary entries and newspaper articles and agricultural reports and military field journals that can tell us where the swarm was and when. Use computer modeling, advanced mathematics, and figure there were 27.5 million tons of insects. We can find spatial reference to help the contemporary woman or man living their lives today beneath a sky unblackened by the airborne 55 billion pounds of bugs. Help them conceive of the scale of the phenomenon by saying that the swarm could have covered a territory equal to all of New England, plus New York, plus New Jersey, plus Delaware, plus Maryland, plus Pennsylvania, the largest congregation of animal life in recorded history. And then we can use those diaries and news reports to point to the misery, the icky horror of it all. All of those bugs, everywhere, on your windows, in your hair, underfoot. They were always underfoot. A layer 4 or 5 inches thick of bugs, packed so tight their wings would interlock and create this woven mat, this of writhing, struggling pests. In Kansas, an Army regiment watched millions of Rocky Mountain locusts cross a creek on foot, each climbing over a mass of the dead and drowned, a pontoon of pests on the march. Elsewhere, they just plummeted, and their millions and millions just splat onto rocks, onto rooftops, onto the heads of grossed-out Coloradans. Kansans, scrambling across fields of the crunching, oozing dead, making for the farmhouse over in the gloom, dogged by a low-flying fog of locusts, swarming around you as you made for safety. No door could be closed fast enough. They'd be in your bed, in your closet, coming down your chimney. And they ate and ate anything and everything. Your crops, your clothes, leaves, bark, bonnets, fence posts, axe handles, other locusts, wool still on the backs of sheep. The saddle still on your horse, your poor horse, whipping her tail, thrashing her head, twitching her ears, another Rocky Mountain locust inside, as more locusts rained down from a cloud that was itself locusts. All those wings beating, all those jaws biting, it sounded like a wildfire, and it left a path like a wildfire. Fields destroyed, crops ruined, lives ruined, left wastelands in their wake. The swarm would stay for 2 days and ruin your year. And you were defenseless. I mean, you'd try. People tried. They burned their own fields. They flooded their own fields. They sent their children out with shovels. Whack, scoop, whack, scoop, whack, scoop. A task both Sisyphean and super disgusting. They built contraptions, they tried everything. Towns put up bounties, they paid for dead locusts by the barrelful, but it was useless. Nothing could stop the swarms. It was too much for many, too costly, too terrifying. The U.S. government called the locusts the biggest impediment to Western settlement. The trains couldn't even run. The tracks were too slick with smeared bugs. Ranchers had to cull their herds with no grass for the cattle. The herds of buffalo were already dwindling. They nearly disappeared along with the grass. Those European immigrants, the Germans and Swedes and Poles and all who'd come looking for fertile ground in the Midwest and found this biblical plague. Many gave up their farms. They kept going west despite the warnings, because where else could they go? They'd plant in the spring by the White River in Colorado and the Green River in Wyoming and pray that the locusts wouldn't swarm this year. Pray you could get a few good years in before they did again. But it wouldn't stop. But then it just did. Those farmers by the White and Green Rivers, in the Colorado and the Upper Platte and the Snake and the Gunnison and the Little Bighorn, tilled the fields and plowed that soil for the first time. People had lived there forever. The Utes, the Navajo, the Arapaho, the tribes of the Rocky Mountain West. But they hunted and fished and moved with the seasons and the buffalo. They didn't really farm. At least not until they were forced to by the agents of the federal government, but that's a story for another day. This one is about the Rocky Mountain locust, which for uncounted centuries would climb up from the dirt from time to time and take to the skies and devour much of the continent, would make it bow to its collective, unfathomable will. It'd rise in uncountable trillions, maybe 12 trillion in 1875, until steel plows and mule teams, new to those fertile river valleys where the locust eggs would lay and wait beneath the ground, tilled that ground, and destroyed those eggs by the millions. And the colonies collapsed. And the last living Rocky Mountain locust was found in the Canadian prairie in 1902. This episode of The Memory Palace is produced by me, Nate DiMeo, with research assistance from Eliza McGraw and engineering assistance from Elizabeth Aubert. We get our ad music from J.D. Sampson. And speaking of music, this episode was scored by an old friend of mine from our collective days in Providence, John Kaloji, who records under the nom de guerre High Orid. That's Aura ''D. That main drone piece is from his beautiful album, No River Long Enough It Doesn't Contain a Bend. The rest of the music he was kind enough to lay down for me over the weekend. You can buy No River Long Enough It Doesn't Contain a Bend or any of his other records from High Orid on bandcamp.com. And now, speaking of friends, my dear friend Helen Zaltzman of the wonderful Illusionist podcast is hitting the road this fall. Go to theillusionist.org, that's illusionist with an A, to see if she's bringing the show to your town. And if you want to check her podcast out, please do. It is delightful and fascinating. I myself have been on it a couple of times, including when she and I tried to learn the world's smallest language, Toki Pona. You can find that episode by going to theillusionist.org and searching for Nate DiMeo. And if you want to find me elsewhere, I'm at The Memory Palace on Twitter and Facebook. You can always hit me up and drop me a line at nate@thememorypalace.org. Talk to you again.
Radiotopia.